behind the Bima with you, for spending some time. I'm such a fan. I'm so grateful for all that you've done and continue to do. And I'm grateful to consider you a friend, that we've been privileged to develop this relationship as you, like all the other wise people in America, are making their way down south to Florida. We're so glad and grateful to have you in Florida, and grateful that you've agreed to go behind the Bima with us today.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg. You are indeed a friend, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And I've done this before, but let me one more time congratulate you on the extraordinary community you've built here in Boca Raton, Florida.
Thank you. I'm really honored. So I want to jump right out of the gate. There's so much to talk about, and our audience in the world has so much access to the many interviews you've had in the illustrious position that you served. I want to try to talk about some of the current events as well, and how you see them. But before we do, I'm curious, what did you always believe about Israel and the Middle East and the U.S.-Israel relationship from the outside, that when you became an insider with a front row seat, you realized how little we know? We sit around Shabbos tables and we pontificate, and we have all of our positions and approaches and opinions, and we think that we're well informed and educated on Israel. When you went from an outsider to an insider, was there a lot that you had believed was true that you learned wasn't, or did you see it from another perspective that gave you a different paradigm?
Well, it wasn't dramatically different. Meaning the assumptions that I've made, the things that I thought I knew, that I thought were correct, the general positions that I had in that that drove my my views and my pre-ambassadorial work, the op-eds I wrote, all those things. Most of that was accurate. I mean, people should feel relatively comfortable that they generally speaking, I think, understand the U.S.-Israel relationship. Here's the difference. The difference is that if you're sitting around, a kiddush on Shabbos and talking about Israel, or if you're a pundit, or I would say, even if you're a Jewish leader in the United States, like you are, there is a margin of error. You have the ability to be wrong. You can express your views, and you can provide advice and guidance, and you can say, this is the way I think things should be. It's a consequence-free environment, right? Nobody's really taking any of our views. No one was acting upon our views. When you are in a position of leadership, this is true about my job. It's true, I think, of almost any position you take of leadership in any government. People's lives are on the line. You don't have that margin of error. What you do actually matters. You can affect dramatically the quality of people's lives, the very existence of people's lives. And so you have to be more careful. You have to be more thoughtful. You have to be less instinctive and more rational. And you have to always consider the fact that there are lots of people that are depending upon you to get it right. And so I think that really comes to play most often in the context of national security. Again, true in America, true in Israel, I'm sure true elsewhere in the world. That's the one area that really doesn't get fully explicated in the news. And so, when I came into office and I got a high level of security clearance, I had the highest, level of security clearance with regard to Israel and the Middle East. I learned a lot. I learned a lot that I didn't know, understood a lot of things, and, was in a much better position to analyze risks, and in a much better position to be a little bit more careful about what I had to say, because, it could create, there were consequences that didn't exist in the private sector. That, I think, is the primary difference.
So do you think that for the average pro-Israel advocate, Jewish or non-Jewish, who feels confident in their convictions, feel very strong, and many of those convictions we should be confident and unapologetic in what we believe to be true in terms of our rights to the land and so on and so forth. But do you think that there's room for more humility in general, given that we're not on that side of the desk that has to make the decisions that have those consequences? Should we assume that a prime minister, a president, an ambassador knows things we don't know, so when they act or don't act in a way that disappoints us, maybe with a little more humility, there's something we don't know?
I'm a big fan of humility, not just for people who are not involved in government, for people who are as well. I think there's nowhere near enough humility expressed by any of us, myself included. I actually try to work on that. Even when we think we know everything, we still don't know everything. And even if we know everything, we're not necessarily processing the information correctly and coming out with the right decisions. We could all be looking at the same set of data and still come up with very different, views as to how to act upon that data. So yeah, we all need more humility. I think when we look at a prime minister or a president and we want them to do something and they don't, and they disappoint us, I think that we should give them to some extent the benefit of the doubt if there's a reasonable basis to conclude that there's some missing link that we're not aware of. I would say though, generally speaking, when I've been disappointed in political leaders, it hasn't been because of that. It's more been because of kind of political winds that blew in a direction that I wasn't in favor of. But sure, look, there's no question that in a position of leadership, especially let's say the Prime Minister of Israel, which is an extraordinarily challenging and difficult job on its best day, we ought to give them. They certainly are entitled to some benefit of the doubt.
To a certain extent, I guess it really segues to the next question. I don't know if you consider the crowning achievement of your tenure the moving of the embassy, Abraham Accords. There's so many to choose from that significantly impacted Jewish destiny, the U.S.-Israel destiny forever, and again, for which we are so grateful. But part of what brought about that change, and you tell this story so compellingly, couldn't put the book down. I love Sledgehammer, that when you were in the Oval Office and the considerations and some of the lobbying and the strategic thinking about how you were going to get the president to agree to move the embassy, part of it was not giving the benefit of the doubt and not buying into what has been said for so long about what would happen if we move the embassy in the Middle East. It'll erupt on fire. So, sometimes it's the humility to say, maybe there's something we don't know. And other times, stop telling me the things I don't know, do what we do know, because we believe with conviction that it will have a different result. And Israel and those who love Israel are so much better off for it because of you and your leadership in that area. So I guess it's knowing sort of on that when to push and when not to push, because when to believe what experts are telling us all along and when not to. So where did that conviction come from in you? How did you know that, given the amount of pressure there was that you describe and that we all know against moving the embassy, this potential threat, or now in retrospect, a sort of made up threat that the Middle East would be lit on fire and never could be turned back? How did you know it wouldn't? And were you afraid that, what if that prediction were right?
Well, the first thing is I didn't know it wouldn't. No one could prove a negative with that level of certainty. It's a huge world, right? I mean, we were looking at a world that where there were potential hotspots from the United States to Africa to Asia to Europe. I mean, all it takes is one crazy person with a Molotov cocktail throwing it into a crowded area, and you have a disaster. So nobody really. I didn't know with certainty that there wouldn't be greater violence. I think we were blessed. I mean, one of my points is, I don't think I'm smarter than anybody. I think I'm luckier than a lot of people, and I think I'm a lot more blessed than I probably deserve to be. And I think, like, that for me, like you touched on this earlier. I do think moving the embassy was the most important thing we did vis-a-vis Israel, and I'll tell you why in a second. But the point of it, though, was you could never, not in 2017, not in 2027, you could never prove that taking a controversial action would not result in some violence somewhere. And I'll tell you the truth, had there, God forbid, been real violence, especially against Americans, as a result of this, my tenure as ambassador might have been very short. I owned this, I pushed this harder than anybody. I think everybody knows that I was the one really driving this, and I could have been wrong, and if I was, and, God forbid lives were lost, and God forbid American lives were lost, I probably would have been fired. Maybe justifiably so. So there's a lot of blessings here that I don't take for granted. The moving of the embassy, however, was the right decision. meaning sometimes you do the right thing and it just doesn't work out right in a politics. You bear the consequences. I always knew it was the right decision, and we did a lot of work to try to identify threats, and we didn't see any threats. Again, that's certainly not an insurance policy. But moving the embassy, I think, was so significant in sending a signal to the world that the United States was going to stand unapologetically, unequivocally with the state of Israel. It was going to fulfill the will of the American people that had been, on the books since 1995 with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, and it wasn't going to be threatened or somehow intimidated by rogue actors. And that this was the first act that the president took in that direction. And I think everybody, stood up and took notice. They said, you know what? The United States is finally standing with Israel in a way that reflects the will of the American people, in a way that frankly reflects a commitment that, had been made by many presidents and not been observed. So, the president keeps his promises. America is not afraid, and America stands with Israel. All of those messages, I think, resonated throughout the world in areas that have nothing to do with Israel. And I think in terms of, the ultimate, kind of punchline of our 4 years in office, the Abraham Accords, I don't think the Abraham Accords would have happened if we hadn't started off with that declaration of extraordinary, unequivocal friendship with Israel, because it made Israel a much more attractive partner with respect to the moderate Gulf states.
Are you frustrated by what seems to be the stalling of the Abraham Accords, the progress that could have still been made or still can be made, the path or trajectory it was on that feels is a little bit stunted? Maybe legitimately there's a lot of other distractions and things going on in the world. Maybe some of it there's not the same will. Does that frustrate you watching?
A little bit. I think there is still progress. It's in smaller steps, less dramatic steps, and I think it is marching forward. In terms of additional countries, you have to look at the Abraham Accords like this. Every Abraham Accord agreement is different. You have to look at it as a triangle. I've given this example before. Israel and a Muslim nation at the base of the triangle, and America at the apex. And America at the apex is projecting its strength and its influence and its ability to kind of encourage and induce both countries to get together. Countries that don't know each other to get closer together. In order for that to happen, America's got to be strong, and it's got to be particularly strong, in the Middle East and projecting its strength, especially to the moderate Sunni nations. Now, an American foreign policy that continuously seeks to cultivate a relationship with Iran is just the wrong policy to project any kind of trust with the moderate Sunni nations. So it's that. It's the weakness generally of America abroad. It's Afghanistan, it's Russia, it's China. It's all the combination of, I think, foreign policy blunders that make it much more difficult for America to really stand in a meaningful way with Israel and another in a Gulf nation. But I think it will come. I mean, I think we are on a glide path to that, to better outcomes. I just think we need to fix our foreign policy.
I just read a review today of 4 members of the administration who wrote books following, and all of them, none of them had been in politics beforehand. In fact, it credited yours was the most well-written and the most compelling and the best. But that was a common denominator and theme. So what do you think in your own background, be it in your childhood, be it in a rabbinic home, we've spoken a lot about Jewish communal leadership and responsibility and sacrifice for that, be it you've always been fighting for Israel in your career, in your legal career, in your business career, what do you think are the key components that positioned you for the success you had as an ambassador? Number one might be that you had never been in politics. That's the conclusion one might reach from that review, and in general, in analyzing the administration and its accomplishments, the disruptive nature of people who had not been in politics. That might be the most important. But if there are other factors that you can credit with your success in being able to negotiate and move along things that had been in a stalemate, bringing about realities that people only dreamt of and said couldn't happen, and being such an advocate and spokesperson that made us swell with pride that someone's saying it. What prepared you for that? Were there people or role models? Were there experiences in your career or your personal life? What do you think positioned you for the most success?
Well, thank you for that question. That was one of the nicest questions anyone's ever asked me. First of all, let me say, I think I know the article you're talking about, and the, there was an argument that there was a benefit to not being in government and not being, a diplomat. I'm never one who thinks that ignorance is an asset. So I don't think not knowing something is ever good. I try to know everything. But the difference is that when we came into office, I'll speak about myself. I don't want to speak for others, but I had a lot of life experience. I had practiced law for over 30 years. I had a pretty good ability to negotiate and to read people and to understand what people cared about and where deals could be made, where they couldn't be made. I also, I think most importantly, like I'm, as you mentioned, I am the son of one of them, in my own personal feeling, one of the greatest rabbis I've ever met. My father was an outstanding, committed rabbi. He was very talented, very good orator, very bright, and probably could have made, you probably hear this from your kids as well. Could have made a lot more money doing something else, and he chose this because of his, his commitment to the Jewish people and his love for the state of Israel. And that was clearly something that was instilled in me for many years from the very beginning. I think I tell a story that, when I was 9 years old, I saw my parents crying. I thought something was wrong, and it turns out they were crying. It was the fourth day of the Six-Day War in Jerusalem was unified. Rabbi Goren was blowing the shofar, and they were just bawling, and I thought something was wrong. But then I came to realize it. But that's the house I grew up in. My father. This is something maybe you'll try one day. I don't know. It's kind of risky. On Yom Kippur, 1973, my father heard, as the services came to an end, he heard that Israel was at war and that it was actually not doing very well that day. There were tanks that were ready, had breached the Golan Heights, so we're heading into the Kinneret, and he got a call that they should they needed to raise money. There was a real shortage of arms and weapons and food and everything else. So he locked the shul with 2,500 people inside. 2,500 very hungry people. And he said, we're not leaving here until we raise a certain amount of money. And he raised the money. And people were saying to him, can we do this? Is it illegal? You're a fire hazard. We're hungry. Get us out of here. And he didn't care because he stood for something that he cared more about. And he taught me the importance of having faith, of believing in principles and acting on principles. And, to me, I took this job with the view that I would come in and I would act on principle. And if I could continue to act on principle and do things that I thought was something my father would be proud of, he had passed away before I took the job. But if my father would be proud of what I was doing, I would keep the job. And if I was ever asked to do anything that I thought my father would be disappointed in me if I did it, that would be the day that I would either not explain why, or if I had no choice, I would resign. So I never took this job, just to put an ambassador title in front of me. It was I things I wanted to accomplish, and I was blessed with the ability to do that. I was given a tremendous amount of runway by the president and by Secretary Pompeo, later on by Vice President Pence, by Jared Kushner. I mean, they really let me run with the ball. And I was blessed with the ability to accomplish a lot. But if there came a point when I couldn't do that, or I'd have to do something that I thought was contrary to my principles or my beliefs, I was absolutely committed that I would walk out the door with my head up high, rather than kind of play along in a political environment that I wasn't comfortable with.
Was that a condition of your accepting the ambassadorship, that you wouldn't just be a figurehead, photo ops, showing up at events, but that you'd actually be part of shaping policy and bringing about policy? Was that something that you had thought about at the beginning, or after you already accepted and went through the process, did you realize, I'm in a position that I could actually make a difference here?
So the president said to me very early on, because he was appointing ambassadors in other locations as well. Although I was the first appointed and the first confirmed. He said to me, "Look, this is not a party job. I don't want to hear about you throwing, events and wearing a tuxedo and hosting people and hosting celebrities. This is a working job. If you're prepared to work, take the job. If not, don't take it." And I had spoken to him. I had spoken to him many times about Israel and various related issues. I was confident that there would be an alignment of views and interests, both with the president and Jared. And in those days, I was interfacing with a lot as well. I thought we had an alignment of interests. So I never really thought that day would come when when I would have to take a difficult stand, but and it didn't come. So I didn't raise it with the president, but I always had that in my mind.
Going back to your father, is it only with hindsight that you're able to look with retrospect and feel that pride of your father and growing up in that home and realize it's his influence on you? Or even when you were young, the child of a rabbi, maybe I'm asking for a friend, when you were young, the child of a rabbi, were you more resentful being in the spotlight? How did you feel that day that he locked the doors? You must have been among the hungry ones who were like, what are you doing? We're all hungry and they're going to kill you and you're crazy and they're going to make fun of me tomorrow in school for this. Did you only appreciate it later in life, or even when you were young, growing up as the child? What would your message be to the children of a rabbi about the role they're in?
Well, there were three of us growing up, and I think my sister and brother, I was the youngest, my older sister and brother probably, wanted to run away from the spotlight rather than embrace it. They certainly weren't, didn't enjoy it as much as I did. I loved it. I mean, I loved seeing my father. It was a large congregation, probably about the same size as yours, and he'd get up on Shabbat morning, and whatever was on his mind, he got it off his mind. He got to speak to people, and he had great influence. And I think, as you probably know probably better than me, great rabbis are not necessarily great speakers. You're a great speaker, but that's not really what makes a great rabbi. What makes a great rabbi are the relationships he forms with each one of his congregants. Especially when they, when they really need someone to help them through a difficult time. And, that I saw that in my father more than anything, that he was, deeply committed to people and how much he changed their lives. How many people were remember, this is a generation ago. So a lot of these people are Holocaust survivors or children of Holocaust survivors. A lot of them are broken. A lot of them are first generation Americans struggling to find a way. They want to be good Americans. They want to be good Jews. They don't necessarily know how to reconcile those conflicts. And the impact he had on people, I thought, was profound. Much greater impact than I've had on anybody, and most people have on anybody. So I would say, for the children of rabbis, if your father is a rabbi, watch him, try to understand better what he does. Give him a break, because he's doing God's work, literally and figuratively, and understand just how much people need, now more than ever, people really need faith, and they need spirituality, and they need purpose and meaning in life. At a time when we've become so digitized and impersonal, they really need someone to help them kind of restore their humanity sometimes. So it's a really important job. I don't think there's a more important job in the world, certainly not in the Jewish world, than being a rabbi. And your kids, whether they appreciate it now, I suspect they probably already appreciate it now, but I have no doubt they'll when they get older, they'll be like me, and they'll realize that they grew up in the presence of greatness.
I hope so. I can only pray. So you grew up the son of a prominent rabbi, and you know what it was like to be a public person. In fact, one of my daughters was once at a camp, NCSY program in Israel for the summer, and she was on a panel, and they asked her, what's the best part and the worst part about being a rabbi's daughter? She thought to herself, she gave a great answer. She said, the best part is that I know everyone. The worst part is that everyone knows me. So when you're a rabbi's child, everybody knows you. Sure. And you experienced that as a rabbi's child. When you took the position as ambassador, you'd already been a public person, and you'd already been a leader in the Jewish community, but ambassadorship takes it to a whole new level, regularly on the news and in newspapers and the media and so on, not all for the good. How did that impact your family, your children? Was everyone bought in before you even did it? Was it what they expected it to be, better or worse? Were there privileges and memories that they're so grateful for? Or are there things that they wish maybe you had considered differently?
So my kids were most of them were older. Most of them were settled and established, and they were living in Jewish communities and pro-Israel communities, and they had kids. And those are the communities where there was very little negative feedback on what I was doing. I think one of my fourth child was not yet married. She is now, and our youngest is. We took a gap after 4 kids and So our fifth is a lot younger. So she's still in college now. So maybe she was kind of the least interested in the public aspect of it. But they were great. I couldn't have done it without their support. I certainly couldn't have done it without my wife's support. I think you know her. You know how incredibly supportive she's been of me and our family. So it was an entirely new level of being in the public eye. It's mostly good. Again, this is a very narrow space. I mean, you're very, very public, but only within a very narrow part of the world of people that focus really on the U.S.-Israel relationship. Most people that focus on it are in favor of it. So, every now and then it gets ugly. I'm not a big fan of the quality of the media writ large. I don't think they do a really good job. I'll tell you. So one time, like the day before the embassy opened, the day before, literally May 13th of 2018, a big article appears that I am personally funding a Jewish terrorist organization. And I had no idea what this was about. And it turns out that there is some organization that I'm associated with that has a name in Israel that sounds like another organization, which arguably may be involved in Jewish violence. Never got a call. Nobody asked me, before they published the article. They were trying to get something in just before the embassy opening to kind of slow it down, kind of cast a spell on it. I mean, those types of things, you can never undo that. You can never unring that bell, and unfortunately that's the power of the media. They put something in a headline, and if they have to retract it, they'll retract it at the bottom of page 11, and it's, but it's just part of a day's work. And I did get better over time with the media. You just have to. It's an acquired skill. You learn it. You learn what to be careful about, and you keep plugging forward.
Did you develop thicker skin? And what's it like reading the reviews of your book, even now that you're out of office? Is it the type of thing that you've learned through public life to, as long as you can be happy, your family's happy with you, you feel comfortable that God's happy with you, or does it still hurt when you read something that stings?
Yeah, I'm human. So, if I read something that's, deeply untrue and insulting, I suppose I would react to it. It doesn't happen that often, but you hit the nail on the head. Like, my kids have to love me and respect me. My wife has to love me and respect me. I don't mean that they have to, but to me, it's important. That's my litmus test of being successful. That my kids love and respect me. My wife loves and respects me. My grandchildren, God willing, will one day know me well enough to respect me. I think they already love me. And then, everything else is kind of, gravy. You get some more people to like and respect you. That's great. But, it doesn't matter what you do for a living. I could be an ambassador, I could be a president, I could be a king, I could be a rabbi. The people you have the greatest influence on are your children. And there's nothing that comes even close. Everybody else will read an article I write or listen to a speech I give. They'll like it. They won't. They'll applaud. They'll go home. They'll do something else. They'll forget about it, 2 hours later. The influence you have on your children is profound, and it stays with them their entire lives. And you have the ability to create happy, self-confident, successful kids, or, God forbid, to screw them up where they're in therapy for 40 years. I mean, that's what parents can do. And so at the end of the day, that's my priority.
One of the things watching as you became ambassador and did the incredible work that you did was cheering on not only that you stood for and fought for the things that so many of us feel connected with and believe, but that you're one of us. Not only that you're Jewish, but you're an Orthodox Jew. From the fight, there's so much relatable, so much that we can connect, so much that's visible about you. I remember in the first year, the vice president actually had, I think it was the first Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration at the White House. And I was privileged to be there with several of my colleagues, rabbis. And the few times we've been there, we linger as long as possible to soak up every moment of being in such a place as long as we can. And you walked by, I didn't know you then, or I didn't personally have the privilege of knowing you then. You walked by, you turned to 3 rabbis who were clearly lingering, and you said, guys, what are you waiting for? The Kiddush? And I'll never forget that line, because it just, again, showed what an insider, how Hamish you are. So how did that impact you as ambassador, you were not only, many of the U.S. ambassadors to Israel are Jewish, and they have to navigate a State Department and other arenas that can be hostile to Jews, but you were a visibly observant Jew. You were a practicing Orthodox Jew. Did that create friction? Was there pushback from State Department, from others that you were practicing diplomacy with? Was the fact that you're visibly and everyone knows you to be an observant Jew, did that make it even more complicated than just being Jewish?
It made it complicated, but my pride in being Jewish is boundless. I mean, it's so much a part of me being proud to be a Jew. We're the oldest people on earth. We're the only people, in the world that can go and pray in the same language, the same liturgy at the same place, that we did 2,000 years ago. Nobody else can do that. And we've survived everything, and we've overcome everything, and we were in exile and prayed for, countless centuries to return to Jerusalem, and we did. And we did it in our lifetime. And we're the lucky ones who were able to be alive during this time when our great-grandparents couldn't have imagined it. And some of our grandparents couldn't have imagined it. And so that fills me with pride every day. And if it comes across to people in the State Department, that's their problem, not mine. But, as I say in my book, I mean, there were times when I get a call from a relatively senior person in the State Department, and the message was, "Don't be so Jewish." And I said, "What?" And they said, "Don't be so Jewish." And I just was stunned. And I said, I can't imagine, there aren't some Italians working in the European, desk, or some African Americans working on the African desk. You tell them not to be so Italian or not to be so African American. I had this conversation, I have a movie coming out with Mike Pompeo sometime in 2023. It's called Route 60, the Biblical Highway. It's all about Kvish Shishim, this road that's the spine of biblical Israel from Nazareth down to Beersheba. But I said to him, Mike, you and I are, I would say, equally pro-Israel. And I get accused all the time of dual loyalty, and you never do. And why am I so lucky that, as a Jew, I'm accused of being too pro-Israel, but, you're not a Jew, and no one ever gives it a second thought that maybe you have dual loyalty. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it. I mean, the non-Jewish pro-Israel community receives almost no criticism for other, from that perspective, but the Jews do. It's very unfair. But as I say, so what? I'm going to be who I am. It's the only person I know how to be, and I am, as I said, boundlessly proud of being a Jew.
Is that the advice you'd give, as we'll get to in a moment, the rise of anti-Semitism today? So there are, for the first time in my lifetime, I have friends who are considering whether they should be wearing their yarmulke to work, whether they should be so visibly Jewish, as you said, at work. I don't know if you saw the clip of I think, Israeli doctor interviewed on French TV, where the French TV personality, they said, "Why are you wearing the yarmulke? Why do you have to be so religious? Why do you look so religious?" So what would your message be to particularly young people just starting their career right now who wear a yarmulke or are visibly Orthodox or observant, whether they can succeed in the outside world, in the workplace? Should they consider taking the yarmulke off? Should they consider hiding their religious practice and belief in order not to elicit the focus and God forbid, anti-Semitism? Or with strength and with pride and who we are and what we do, and the way you said, it's the other person's problem? What would your message be to them?
Well, we have to be strong and proud of who we are. It depends how bad it is. And I mean, I wouldn't tell somebody to put on a kippah if they're walking through a neighborhood where there's a high probability that they're going to get hurt. I don't want anybody getting hurt. And in those communities, what we have to do is demand that there be a real show of force, a real show of police force against the anti-Semitic world. So I've been pushing for months, and I don't think anybody's taken this up yet. But I think, for example, in places like New York and other areas where there are Jews who look like Jews, visibly Jewish people, I think the police force needs to have an undercover unit where people of the police dress as Hasidim, dress as Haredim, so that number one, they'll do a better job of catching these vicious criminals, and number two, the criminals will think twice because they may not know whether they're attacking a Jew or attacking a cop. But so look, I think we have to be incredibly strong on our right to be Jewish anywhere we want to be. And the irony is that one of the safest places to be Jewish now is in places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, in
Right.
Manama, and even Morocco, right? I mean, it's really odd. I mean, it's safer to. I definitely feel safer in Abu Dhabi than I do in most parts of Europe, and probably some parts of America. We have to fight back. I don't think we're fighting back as hard, as strong as we can. I just looked at. I don't know if you noticed. So there was a group assembled yesterday in Washington. It was a group to combat anti-Semitism, and they put out a statement. And I just read the statement before, half an hour before you and I started.
I saw your tweet. Yeah.
And it's all about anti-Semitism, but the headline is about anti-Semitism. The tagline is about anti-Semitism, but in the middle, they felt the need to condemn anti-Semitism along with Islamophobia and other related forms of bias. I think that we deserve our own. Can't we get one day, where it's just about us? I mean, why? I mean, I'm not in favor of Islamophobia. I think it's terrible. I think all forms of racism are terrible. But you know what? There are plenty of events that combat, racism with regard to other ethnic minorities, and Jews don't try to insinuate themselves into those discussions. Anti-Semitism right now is an epidemic, and it's higher than it's been maybe in 50 years, and we're entitled to a discussion and an effort that's uniquely focused on the Jewish people, and we don't need to dilute it with other forms of hatred, as bad as they are.
I wonder, I feel strongly about this. I don't have a conclusion, but I feel strongly that we should be thinking about that we're reacting to this wave, and hopefully it's only a wave, but likely more than that, of anti-Semitism by sort of reverting back to our normal reactions. And there are legacy organizations that have been fighting anti-Semitism, and they've done wonderful work, and they're wonderful. I'm not going to say a negative word about them, but whatever investment we're making in them is there's a poor return because anti-Semitism is at an enormous high. So something about that way of that methodology and strategic thinking is not working. So is there a group internally, before we sort of react right away when Kanye, react right away when other virulent anti-Semites say, tweet, post, do things, and we like to speak truth to power, we like to shine the spotlight and call them out. Maybe that's not intelligent. Maybe that's not so right. Maybe in today's world of media, social media, of viral world, of trolls, of cancel culture, maybe there's a different strategy. So are we bringing a sense of nuance to this conversation? Are we thinking strategically that the old ways and legacy methods, they won't work today? They're not working today. Clearly, they're not working today. So does every person who says or does something anti-Semitic, are we serving our greater goal by calling it out? Or maybe our emphasis and focus should be our strength and our pride and our, right? The Israeli, I know Prime Minister Netanyahu at AIPAC many years ago made the point that the response to BDS is to make sure that Israel's churning out technology that nobody would ever boycott. The stronger and the prouder that we are, then it would be against someone's own interests. So maybe the focus should be on the Jewish people and how we live and our pride and so on. I think that we need to have a major conversation around this instead of just instinctively going back to the old ways that we've done all along.
Well, I agree with you. And look, in the business world where I live, if the CEO of a company came to me and said, I'm losing money, our product isn't selling, I want you to invest in me, I'd look for a new CEO. I certainly look for maybe invest someplace else. It seems that we have all these entities that are pushing and fundraising because of anti-Semitism, but their job was to keep it from happening in the first place. So, these are not successful organizations. And look, I have a sort of maybe it's overly simplistic, but there are other minorities where any racial insinuation against them is completely unacceptable. Properly so. All right. I mean, there are words you cannot say on TV, in sports. You lose your job. Your careers are over. Properly so. We don't have that as the Jewish people. We have not established red lines for ourselves and say you cannot accuse us of dual loyalty. You cannot accuse us of manipulating the banks or the media. You cannot say that you cannot pull out the protocols of the elders of Zion, and there have to be consequences, real consequences, the same as others, who violate those red lines in the context of other minorities. We haven't done that. We're not good at it. We're very tolerant people, very accepting. We're willing to listen to jokes and to joke about ourselves. We just have not created the boundaries that I think are necessary. That's number one. Number two, we don't get out onto the street. We just don't do it. There's I think there was some attempt maybe a year and a half ago, I think a year ago this past summer, do something in Washington against anti-Semitism. Nobody showed up. A Jewish Lives Matter march would not be well attended, unless the only way you get it well attended would be if you called all the yeshiva principals and you sent them on buses, then you could get a big crowd. But we just sort of don't, we sort of think if we ignore it, it's going to go away, and it's not, we're doing fine, and we've got to pay yeshiva tuition, so we got to have our jobs, and we don't want to make waves. It's a mistake. I think it's a mistake. I mean, I think Israel is thankfully, it's a whole different world in Israel. I mean, I think that this is a question about the future of the diaspora, or maybe is there a future, for the diaspora? There's a future in Israel. Israel's not an issue. Israel has 7 million Jews, and everybody there identifies as Jewish, no matter however they might observe. They're all consider themselves Jewish. It's a Jewish state. It's a strong state. It's got a great economy. It's got a military. It's the home of, it's our biblical homeland. They're not at risk. It's the diaspora that's at risk. I mean, the Jewish community in America hasn't grown. It's shrunk everywhere else in the world. And do we want to fight for, our American diaspora? I think we have to fight. I think if we don't fight, we're going to lose it.
Isn't there an enormous complicating factor here that's different, though, than the other examples of bias and racism, which is that part of the anti-Semitic trope is that we control the media, and therefore we can shut down people who say things we don't like. So that's part of the nuance that I'm wondering whether we need to think about when we make those red lines, which I agree 100% with you, that we should have those red lines and ask others to hold people accountable for it. But the problem is, if people get canceled because they cross the line, then does that to a certain extent not just contribute to the trope that you see? The Jews are very sensitive. Someone said something they don't like. They got me canceled. They got my career over. They got me thrown off TV, or whatever the case may be. And isn't that a complicating factor here?
It's a complicating factor, but it's not one that would cause me to reconsider the approach. I mean, look, we just have to be strong and unapologetic about who we are. And if somebody that works for us, if we happen to, own a media outlet, which we really don't, the Jews don't really own that many, but if we did, and someone working for us said something that we thought was unacceptable, I wouldn't hesitate to act because somebody would call me names. I mean, I just think we have to kind of move forward with our heads up high and not be so concerned about what people think. I mean, again, I've said this in Israel a lot, but I think it's true here. People will respect us if we respect ourselves. If we respect ourselves and say, look, we are here, we're not going anywhere. We don't need to justify our right to be on this earth. I mean, look, we could point to the fact that we win a disproportionate number of Nobel Prizes, and we've invented all kinds of cool technology, and we write more books per capita than anybody else. Who cares? I mean, it's great. I mean, I'm proud of the Jewish people, but that's not what we don't have to write, a Pulitzer Prize-winning book in order to be entitled to live peacefully within this country. So I just think that, we try too hard to be accepted. And I think we need to, instead of looking at the world around us and make sure they accept us, let's make ourselves just better. Let's become better Jews, more informed Jews, understand better Jewish history, understand the greatness of being a Jew, what it means, the fact that we're living on a continuum of 4,000 years, an unbroken continuum of Jewish scholarship and Jewish observance and Jews caring for each other. I mean, that to me is worth a whole lot more than what some anti-Semite, thinks about me. And as far as anti-Semites go, look, we're not going to change their hearts and mind. The whole idea that we're going to somehow cause them to think differently about Jews, I think is, I mean, I wouldn't tell somebody not to try, but we're not going to change the hearts and minds of anti-Semites. They're not even going to pay attention to anything that we're putting out. I mean, they're not going to go to the Museum of Tolerance. They're not going to go to Yad Vashem. I mean, these are not people who are interested in learning. They're people that hate. So I just think we have to be tougher and smarter and more internally focused on ourselves, make ourselves better, make ourselves smarter, and make ourselves stronger.
We maybe also identify the influencers and opinion shapers in those other communities, because what scared me is Kanye writes a horrific tweet, and whether he's well, not well mentally, the debate all revolves around him, instead of realizing that within 40 minutes of writing that tweet, 30,000 people liked it. I'm less worried about Kanye. I'm more worried about that 30,000 people could press like on a sentiment like that. And I wonder whether sort of the AIPAC model about finding the up and coming leadership in the general world and exposing them and educating them about Israel, maybe we need to find in the pop culture, music industry, celebrity industry, athlete industry, who are influencers and shapers of the masses, who exposing and sensitizing them to this issue can become advocates, not only for ourselves, but maybe then it would trickle down.
It might. I mean, that you're right. I mean, that is the danger of Kanye West, that he's an iconic figure with a lot of people that like his music and therefore like him. And that's why he's so dangerous. That's why, I mean, it's not that he stumbled upon some new form of anti-Semitism that's more virulent. It's just that he is very popular, and it's a very big issue. But again, I just don't. I don't think we should. I don't think we should panic. I think we need to fight back, and on all levels. But most importantly, and this is, I think, the most important thing, we have to put violent anti-Semites must be in jail for long prison sentences. I mean that, and we don't have the police infrastructure in the places where it's needed the most, in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Philadelphia. Those are the best places in the world to be an anti-Semite, because there's no bail, and you get out quickly. So that's got to change. I mean, I think that is the single biggest contributor to the violence on the streets. It's not that more people hate Jews; it's that more people who hate Jews are getting away with it.
It's a great point. There's some lobbying work to be done there. So you spent 4 years in Israel as ambassador, but I know that you had your own timeline for when you wanted to go to Israel for longer periods of time, and you were exploring it. I don't know if you're comfortable telling the story, but what was your timeline from trying to begin to move to Israel for longer periods, and anyone give you some advice about that area?
So, I know what you're referring to. Yeah. So about 5 years before I became ambassador, my wife and I were discussing about where we want to what we want to do when we grow up. And I always felt that the only reason not to be in Israel, if you're really a strong Zionist and you really believe in the importance of Israel for the Jewish people, the only reason really was financial. You can't make a living there. And I reached a point where that wasn't really a factor, and so I started to think about it. And our kids were a lot younger then, and a lot to think about. And I went and met with a rabbi who I've since met with many times. I'm not sure I'm comfortable giving his name, but he's a brilliant rabbi, lives in Jerusalem, and I met with him. And most of the meeting, we talked about the kids, which ended up being much more interesting to me than my own personal issues. But at the end, I said to him, Rabbi, I really want to talk to you about what you thought about moving to Israel. And he said to me, don't go. He said, stay in America 5 more years. And I said to him, yeah, but in 5 more years, I'll be 58. I'll be getting older. I want to go when I still have some real energy. Turns out I have plenty of energy now, but I said, but maybe I should go now. Not. He says, no, wait 5 years. I said, well, what am I going to do in 5 years? He says, trust me, you will have plenty to do when you get to Israel in 5 years. And I forgot all about that. Sometime around 2019, 2 years after I was ambassador, I was sitting in Herzliya, and I was talking to some friends, and they needed some help with something, and I suggested that they speak to this rabbi. And all of a sudden, Tammy and I look at each other, and we said, "Holy cow!" We forgot all about it, but he was the one who said, in 2017, I'd have something important to do in Israel. So there are some really gifted rabbis. I think you should easily number yourself among them. But there's some really gifted rabbis out there who have great insights into the future.
It's an amazing story. So thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. I guess we'll wind down with one last question, which is, tell us what life's like post-ambassadorship. You know, when you're an ambassador, you are in a position of influence and power and access, intelligence, policy shaping, and then, you know, one day that's it. You go from ambassador to non-ambassador. I've always wondered this. I hope to not know for a very long time what it's like to go from being the rabbi to not the rabbi, from giving the speech to listening to the speech. But I wonder for presidents, that transition from one day having the nuclear codes and getting the intelligence briefings and being the most powerful person on earth to being retired that next day. So what, on a different scale, but what's that like? What's life like for you post-ambassadorship?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, just to give you a sort of on a practical sense, you know, from one day to the next, I'm going from a 12,000 square foot, you know, mansion, you know, with a staff of a full-time staff of 7 domestic staff and another, you know, I was the second most heavily guarded person in the country. I was always traveling with a security detail of 8 people. And like in one day, that's it. It's gone. You're on your own. Go find a place to live and go try to be careful.
Good luck.
So it's a that in and of itself is stunning. But all the things I cared about so much when I was ambassador, I still care about. What I have found is that in this, if you will, this space of being pro-Israel, having good relations with America, understanding Israel, understanding the leaders of both countries, and having a very strong view as to, you know, Israel's rights, not just to be there and to flourish, but to retain all of their biblical homeland and to flourish as a Jewish state and to defend itself against all threats. I mean, what I found is that when I left office, I was still sort of the main person occupying that space. You know, I still had a lot to contribute. The Israeli government, they all wanted to continue talking with me. Obviously, I wasn't an ambassador anymore, and I didn't have any official title, but they wanted some thoughts and some advice, and people, leaders in America, wanted the same. And so I keep busy with, you know, this foundation that I started called the Friedman Center for Peace Through Strength, and I wrote a book, and I'm making movies, and I have a job as well. You know, I'm also engaged in some business, and so I mean, I'm very happy with you know what I'm doing, and I'm keeping busy. But my, you know, obviously is with the Jewish people in the state of Israel and its support and relationship with America. So I find that I'm still able to really make a contribution. You know, I really kind of, especially when it's kind of helping Israelis really understand America better and what can be done. And look, I think, you know, there was one thing that we left on the table that I'm sorry about. I mean, we ran out of time. We would have dealt with it in a second administration. But apart from, you know, adding more countries to the Abraham Accords, you know, we left open this massive issue for Israel, you know, which I tell the Israelis, you know, almost every country in the world can answer a very simple question. You know, what are your borders? And you ask the Israeli public, what are your borders? You'll get different answers. Some will say it's the Jordan River. Some will say it's the Green Line. Some will say it's the settlement blocks, you know, without even knowing what the settlement blocks are. It's a very complicated issue, and it's something which I strongly believe, you know, Israel needs to decide, you know, for itself, by itself. You know, if the quartet decides, or America decides, or the UN decides, or, you know, no one will be happy with the outcome. Israel needs to take ownership of this issue and develop a national consensus for how to resolve it. I mean, this subject alone, you and I could talk another hour about, and maybe we will one day, but I sort of feel uniquely informed and able to help with that issue, and I want to help both America and Israel get to the right place. Just as a free agent, I don't represent anybody, but I just want to. I think I have something to contribute to that discussion.
No question. So, will we see Ambassador Friedman back in politics? Will Ambassador Friedman be back in the arena?
It depends whether you ask Ambassador Friedman or Mrs. Friedman. You'll get 2 different answers. It depends. if I was given this opportunity again, and I thought I could continue to, make the kinds of advances that we had made in the first Trump administration, I'd have to really seriously consider it.
Amazing. Ambassador Friedman, thank you so much for joining us. This was really an amazing conversation, and I'm going to take you up on that opportunity to continue, because there is so much that we left on the table. But thank you for all that you've done throughout your life and career and leadership in the Jewish community, and particularly as ambassador. There's so many things that we remain so grateful for, and it sounds like the best is yet to come. The biggest differences can still happen ahead of us, so we can't wait to see them. Thank you.
Bezrat Hashem. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg.
Rabbi Broide.
What a
great ambassador, David Friedman.
I could keep listening. First of all, everyone wants to know right now, who's that rabbi? Because everyone wants to go visit him.
We can't disclose who that rabbi is, but let's just say that story is not an unusual story for that rabbi. That rabbi has a lot of stories like it. And I don't know exactly what to make of that, because our rabbis, as brilliant, as great as they are not prophets. And they're certainly not Hashem himself, but still, don't take it too lightly. These rabbis are great people, have great insight.
Amazing.
But it's a great conversation, easy flowing. He's such a mensch.
Easy flowing. He's such a mensch, and he's so easy to speak to, and he's so humble.
Yeah.
It's really
he said, not smarter than most, luckier than most.
Right.
And I also think he looks back at his impact, and he attributes so much to hashgacha, to divine providence, to God opening doors, enabling things to happen. But he's responsible. In his book, he tells the stories of going into that Oval Office and convincing the president to make moves like moving the embassy and others like it. I mentioned earlier, I was at this AJC event tonight, and there's big talk about adding the Saudis to the Abraham Accords. It's a game changer. Right. The Middle East is changing. The conversation is not all about conflict. It's not all about security. It's about high tech and technology and trade. I think she said, the person speaking, that the UAE, since the Abraham Accords, has done more than $3 billion of trade with Israel. And in the first half of 2022, did more than in 2021 altogether. And so those numbers are only growing, and it's in everyone's interest. It's in everyone's interest to continue to stick together.
Yeah, it sounds like Ambassador Friedman is interested. If there's an opportunity to get back involved,
if there's an opportunity,
his wife. But it sounds like there could be many opportunities.
Yeah. There's a lot more to talk about on that anti-Semitism conversation. I think that we need to be thinking about it in different ways, and with tremendous gratitude to the organizations who historically have tackled this issue and the legacy anti-Semitism or stopping anti-Semitism organizations. But we need some new eyeballs on it and some new paradigms, some new ways of thinking, because it's a new world and it's a new set of enemies, and they're using new tools. And whatever was used in the past is clearly not working. Objectively, you measure it, it's not working. So time to shift and try something else.
Did that sound like the message coming from the AJC tonight?
I think they're talking in that way. I think that there's, the people I was sitting with, and they said they watch Behind the Bima, so I guess we'll find out if they do, if we're in touch after this now. But, they run a significant foundation. They're very involved in philanthropy, and they're very eager to see a new language, a new approach, a new strategy to anti-Semitism, which also includes, I was thinking, a little bit of the AIPAC methodology of trying to identify up-and-coming influencers and winning them over as friends for Israel. I think the Jewish people have to try to identify celebrities, athletes, influencers in other communities, not the Jewish community, who they don't know Jews, and to win their friendship and to turn them into advocates and to have them stand up and say, I know Jewish people and I won't tolerate that kind of speech about them. So, John Mellencamp.
Yes.
John Mellencamp is induction to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Maybe it's possible we might be having John Mellencamp on Behind the Bima, but in his induction, anyone younger than us.
Just telling you, if he comes on,
that's
going to be a live interview in his house, and I'm going to be there.
Can you name a John Mellencamp song?
Yeah, of course I can. First of all, he's drummer Kenny Aronoff. I know the whole band.
I bet you do. But anyway, he stood up. He's getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and doesn't talk about his historical career in music. He steps up and he says, hey, we can't tolerate this anti-Semitism. And he names this Jew who's his agent. And he says, this guy changed the industry for all of us, took care of all of us. He's an amazing guy, as every Jew I've ever known. And enough already. We're not tolerating it. And I think we need to win more friends who are willing to step up and stand out, say those kind of things, celebrities, athletes, and others. And it's different than the old way we dealt with things.
But what was so powerful about it, there were two things that were so bad. There were three things. Number one, that he made the statement. Number two, that you see his agent, his lawyer starts crying, and you see how moved he is by the statement. But number three, you saw the entire place give him a standing ovation.
Yeah, huge applause.
So you're like, well, if everyone's giving him a standing ovation, and this is Hollywood, and this is the pop world is so where are they?
They're afraid. They're afraid. It's becoming increasingly popular to be able to repeat and tweet anti-Semitic tropes and comments, and it's unpopular to stand up with a Jew.
Right.
And we're the Jewish celebrities. We're our high-profile Jewish celebrities. I would say high-profile Jewish athletes. It's a very short list. It's a little pamphlet, if you know what I'm saying.
Did you say that we are or where are?
Where are they?
You said we are high-profile Jewish celebrities.
No. Where? WHERE. Where are the high-profile Jewish celebrities, athletes to speak up? And where are our friends? Where are our friends who are willing to stand up also in the different worlds and venues and arenas? Because it's time to do something. And I love what Ambassador Friedman said, and I think somebody should be coordinating our lobbying effort that you're violent against a Jew in New York, anywhere in the country. It's consequences. You don't get out of jail the next day with nothing on your record. We throw the book at you, prosecute you to the maximum of the law. We make it that we incentivize that you're out of your mind to do that. And I loved his idea about undercover policemen dressed up as Haredi Jews. Yeah. And the next thing you know, somebody takes one of them on, and the policeman reveals he's a policeman. Anti-Semites are not going to start up with a Jew so quickly. I don't know. One of the people I sat with tonight,
talking about a reemergence of JDL.
I was about to say, one of the people I sat with tonight, wonderful people. It was so nice to make new friends from this prominent foundation, said, hey, maybe it's time to bring back the JDL. Maybe the Jews can't rely only on others. What was it? Every Jew at 22? Was that their slogan?
No, every Jew at 48 right now.
I don't even know what but it is scary. It's a scary world and a scary time that we're living in. So there were some important thoughts there, and we got to think about it in a new way, from a new direction. But it was an honor and a privilege. Love to continue the conversation about his views about the intractable Palestinian conflict, what can be done, what possibilities there are, what was left on the table that they didn't get to. He alluded to a little bit. So there's a lot more to talk about, but
there's a lot that I wish that, imagine you could really go behind the Bima with him.
Yeah.
You probably have. I'm saying you probably had some off the record conversations, but there's so much there.
He's really a warm and a wonderful person. Really enjoy that privilege of that opportunity, and we'll continue the conversation with him and with many others in the future. But until next time, Yotes Kislev, Hoff Kislev. I didn't realize it continues. In fact, I got to go to a Fabrengen right now. There's another Fabrengen.
Really?
Right now. This is like the longest Yantif, Isruchag, Yantif Sheni Shagalius, but party's still going. So the light's still shining. And the Hanukkah next week. Any message for Hanukkah before we close, Rabbi Broide?
It's about, spread that light. We don't diminish the light that we give. We only increase it for others and for ourselves.
That's right. When you light someone else's candle, when you light a fire, your light doesn't get any smaller. You could spread it infinitely without getting any smaller.
I love Hanukkah.
Spread those lights. Next week we come to you on Hanukkah. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy, stay holy.